So maybe you found a mushroom and you've identified it as chicken of the woods. So you've properly identified it. You made sure that someone that has a lot more experience and is very knowledgeable in foraging and what kind of mushrooms are poisonous and not poisonous and whether or not they're edible. Or you've done your own very diligent research and you've made sure that these are good to eat and they are in fact chicken of the woods. So as you can see, these are chicken of the woods, I have confirmed. And I've ate these types of mushrooms many times before. They're probably on my top 10 at least of my favorite mushrooms ever to eat. It's not necessarily that they are actually that delicious. It's just that they take the flavor of whatever you put them in. So if you use like something like chicken broth or a lot of seasonings, then they take that flavor and they really soak it up, as mushrooms will tend to do. So it's not necessarily the flavor that makes them so good, it's their ability to take a hold of the flavor of the seasonings and the spices or whatever you cook them with, and they really soak up that flavor. So chicken of the woods, as far as where you're going to find them, basically anywhere you're going to find most mushrooms. You're going to usually find them in the forest, in shady places and fertile grounds. I find a lot next to creeks. They can either be on trees, on logs. So it's actually kind of a proud dad moment. We were out exploring the creek and a few of my kids actually noticed a big clump of these, and they didn't exactly know what the name was, but they knew that they were edible and that I've picked them before and we've cooked them at home before. So then once we knew they're out, we went looking and we found another nice patch. So here's actually one large one, and then what we took from another patch, because I just didn't really need the whole thing and it was a public area, so I left a little bit for the next person. But anyways, first thing I want to talk about with these chicken of the woods is sort of, whether they're good or not. So if you find a fresh patch, they're going to look like this. They're going to be nice and kind of firm, but not soggy. They're not going to be so firm that they're almost woody. So if you find these and they're almost woody or they're very tough, those have been there for a while, they've matured, and they're probably no good to eat. On the other side of that, if they're nice and soggy, they're probably also not very good to eat, which means they've probably taken on so much water, or they're rotten, and they're not going to be any good to eat either. So if you have a little nice flaky piece like this, nice tender new one, this one I think is a little bit faded, it's a little bit harder, but this one is super tender, and I caught it just at the right time. So with the chicken of the woods, you don't necessarily want to eat the entire thing. You can eat the entire thing is edible, but when you get down to some of this part around the base where it's thicker, it's clumpier, that's going to be a lot harder than these nice tender outer petal. Chicken of the woods is a shelf mushroom, and I gotta say it's probably one of the most easiest mushrooms to identify, and be sure that there's really no real close lookalikes. You have jack-o'-lantern, which some people say kind of looks like it, so that might be one that you would want to look at and make sure that it is not, because that can make people nauseous. For the most part, chicken of the woods is pretty easy to identify. But then again, make sure you do your due diligence. So what I'll tend to do is I'll start picking off these larger flakes like this. So I will start around the tips here where they get a little bit lighter and they get a little bit orange down here. And so I'll kind of find this spot where it gets thick, gets a little bit thicker, and I'll usually cut that off. Not to say that you can't eat that, but that it is a little bit more fibrous and tough. But it kind of depends also on the age of your mushroom. So this one, for instance, might actually be alright. It's really firm, and it's really fleshy, and it's holding together well, and it's got a lot of good moisture left to it. It's just the right amount of moisture. So this one might be okay, but this other drier one here, a lot of times the stems will start to get woody down below before the outer regions get hard. So as you can see, this one here has a little bit more of a white tint to it, and it is a little bit harder. I think the outer part right here is going to be fine, but it does get a little bit woody, and it's really completely up to you. If you don't mind a little tougher or harder texture, then it would probably be just fine. And then this one's pretty clean, but I just like to go and kind of get all the dirt up on there knocked off. So I'll just go through here and just brush off any of the little particles that got stuck. I won't run these underwater whatsoever. Just get the dust, the sand, and the dirt off, and the bugs, the little pieces of grass and all that stuff that's on there. Try to get that off of there. So what you really don't want to do with these is you don't really want to soak them in water. So a lot of people soak their morels or whatever in water, and that's fine. To me, they get a little bit soggy. These are really going to soak it up, more so than probably a lot of other mushrooms. If you put these into water for a long time, they're going to get super waterlogged. They're going to get kind of mushy, and they're just probably not going to be that desirable anymore. But if you keep them nice and dry like that, at most, if you can just splash a little bit of water and kind of scratch the dirt off, that might be the most that you'd have to do. But try not to get these wet at all if you can. And a lot of times you can just kind of cut out. If it's just something you can't clean off, you can just cut it out. And a lot of times they come in big clumps like this, so you should have plenty if you're just trying to feed a family. So I'll go through here and I'll just cut the tender little parts off, and I'll separate everything out and get everything nice and clean. So once I get to that process, I want to talk about cooking these. They're called chicken of the woods. They're called a lot of different other things, but their main name is usually chicken of the woods, and they're of course called that because it can replace chicken in almost any recipe that you can think of. There's a lot of different ways that you can do these. Any recipe that you would do with chicken, you're going to be able to probably also do with this. They have a ton of protein. They also have carbohydrates and a ton of other essential nutrients and minerals in them. So the first thing I'll talk about is sauteing them. Sauteing them, you can just get little pieces like this. I like to put a little bit of butter in there or a little bit of olive oil, coat them with some salt and pepper, and you can just throw those into the skillet and let them saute, flip them over, do that for a few minutes on each side until they're nice and crisp, and those turn out really good. You can also fry them just like you would fried chicken. Same thing, you just get a little bit of grease or whatever kind of oil you want to use in a frying pan. Peanut oil works really well. And you can coat those, you can wash them off, so you can coat those in a little bit of an egg wash and a little bit of flour and whatever kind of seasoning you like. You can put those into the fryer or the skillet with your oil and cook them until they're nice and crispy just like you would chicken, and they taste very, very similar to chicken. I have barbecued these. It's basically the same deal as barbecue and chicken. Again, I like to coat them in olive oil, a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper, kind of coat those in barbecue sauce, and throw them on the grill, and they're very, very good that way as well. Again, guys, basically anything that you do with chicken, these are going to soak up the flavor, whatever seasoning you put on there. So you can do lemon pepper, anything that you can think of, garlic butter, just a ton of stuff. They're a very versatile mushroom, and that's one of the reasons I like them so much. So the next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about how to preserve these, because you get 3 or 4 of these and you start to realize real fast that you're not going to be able to eat them all in one sitting. Even if you have a large family like I do, you're going to have a tough time trying to eat them. So these will last 3 or 4 days in the fridge, in a Ziploc bag, in your vegetable drawer. You can also put them in a paper bag, and that will usually extend it just a little bit more, because if you put it in a Ziploc bag and they don't get air, sometimes they'll get mushy after those 3 or 4 day mark, and sometimes you can move it out just a little bit more with a brown paper bag. Because they are getting a little bit of air, they're going to be drying a little bit, but for the most part you'll retain most of that moisture, and you should be fine, sometimes up to a week. So that will work really good for your short-term preservation. If you would like to use them a lot longer down the road, say you want to store up something for winter. So what you can do is you can take this and you can put it in a Ziploc bag, and you can put it right directly into your freezer, and you can freeze this thing whole. Can't do that with a lot of mushrooms, but you can get away with it with this one. You'll lose just a little bit of your flavor and a little bit of your moisture, but you won't be losing a whole bunch. Typically you can take it right out of the freezer and you can just start cooking it just like you would when it was fresh. Another way that you can do it that works really well, if you want to say use it in soups, stocks, or stews, is you can clean it, cut it up, and you can put it in your dehydrator and let it get nice, dry, and crispy. And you can save it like that in a jar or something like that. You can put it in a mason jar and you can seal it off. I've had mine last up to a year like that. Or if you want to save room, you can throw those dehydrated mushrooms, those dehydrated chicken of the woods, you can throw them into a blender and you can basically make a powder out of them. Same thing, you can take that powder and you can put it into a mason jar. You can get a lot more chicken of the woods into a mason jar in powder form than you can if you're just putting the whole large chunks in there because of airspace, etc. And again, that'll last about a year on the shelf, and you can throw that into any kind of stew or soup that you'll be making, and basically the moisture from the soup or the stew reconstitute those, and they'll again soak up that flavor. I'm going to start breaking down these, get them in the fridge, and we're going to start our preservation process. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. And if you want to see more videos like this around the homestead, foraging, hunting, fishing, and rural life in general, hit that subscribe. And I'd love to see you again. Thanks for tuning in.